And live on DSTV channel 421, GoTV 125. This is Connect Africa with me, Blessed Sugan. Welcome to our program. And today we have updates on the elections taking place in Sierra Leone. And what is the cost of political unrest in the West Africa sub-region? We'll go into the infiltration of light weapons on the rise in the sub-region, plus the Paris Climate Finance Summit, which failed to deliver the debt forgiveness plan. How are African countries taking what looks like a lifeline thrown at us? Before we go into the details, here's a wrap of some of the stories making the headlines across the continent.
Lateral ceasefire declared by the head of Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces is due to come into effect today for the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Adha, which starts on Wednesday. The pause in the conflict was announced by the leader of the RSF, Mohamed Hamdan Daglo. Nigerian police authorities have announced plans to withdraw some police units from protecting and escorting VIPs in favor of redeploying them to work on national security. Police chief says while the protection of dignitaries remains paramount, it is imperative that we realign our priorities to address the escalating security challenges faced by the nation as a whole. Movement has been detected underground at a shattered gold mine in South Africa's Free State, where at least 31 miners working illegally died in a suspected gas explosion in May, raising a slim possibility that there may be survivors, officials have told the Associated Press. Officials said it is likely there were more miners underground than initially thought. A search operation has not yet been launched because of dangerously high levels of methane at the mine and the possibility of more explosions.
And those are some of the stories making the rounds across the African continent. But let's turn our attention now to the Paris Climate Finance Summit, where low-income countries fraught with a growing debt crisis were thrown a lifeline, though the gathering fell short of the debt forgiveness program that most of the African countries attending had hoped for. The summit ended with the 40 world leaders agreeing on the need to transform the world's approach to the investment needed to leave the countries out of poverty. We'll be taking the thoughts of some of the advocates of the green agenda on the continent for you on this very summit, which is happening across, of course, it took place in France, and many African countries are beginning to position themselves for the way forward and what's next to come from the continent. But it's a good time to, first of all, in that mood of elections, to start off with what's happening in Sierra Leone, which we'll be getting for you shortly as some provisional results are coming through. But let's talk security and take you to the story of Guinea-Bissau, Guinea-Conakry, which have all had their share and fair share of turmoil in the West Africa sub-region over the years. Sudan, Mali, Burkina Faso, Senegal, and with what recently happened weeks ago in Uganda, which experienced the mayhem of what many call the political strife. The common denominator in all of this is the conflict and the use of weapons and guns, mostly purchased illegally. How is the continent being infiltrated with these light weapons, and how can that be addressed? I want to bring in now Dr. Sani Adamu, who is the ECOWAS Programs Officer responsible for disarmament and arms control. Thank you for spending some time with us here on Connect Africa. We know that over the years, of course, you've made that passionate appeal to member states of ECOWAS countries, asking them to tackle this growing trade of illicit arms. Given the statistics available to you, why would you say that it is important now that we address these issues immediately? Dr. Sani, are you still with us? We'll get Dr. Sani for you shortly, plus get that concern from ECOWAS on the growing trade of arms, which is becoming a problem for the West Africa sub-region. But all over the weekend and throughout last week, a lot of people were focused on matters relating to climate change because French President Emmanuel Macron held a summit which brought together African leaders. Here's a wrap of some of the activities that took place.
It was a gathering of at least 14 African leaders who honored the invitation from French President Emmanuel Macron for a two-day summit for a new global finance pact in Paris. The dialogue is centered on finding feasible ways to tackle poverty, global warming, and environmental conservation as priority areas in the June 22 to 23 meeting. According to French President Emmanuel Macron, climate change and poverty eradication are important and that countries shouldn't have to choose between reducing poverty and protecting the planet.
There are four main, simple items I'd like to set up at the beginning. First, the first principle is that no decision maker, no country should have to choose between the alleviation of poverty and climate protection. Many decision makers over the last few years said, at the end of the day, you have settled the problem of poverty. Why don't you explain what we should do for climate challenges? But we haven't settled the poverty issue yet, so we shouldn't be faced with this choice.
But on the side of African leaders, it was a resounding message, the need to reform the global financial architecture as extremely rich countries are accused of increasing their wealth at the expense of climate reforms.
But I think what is important to many of us is that there should be solid consensus on the reform of the financial architecture of the world. Because without that reform, the dreams and the objectives that we have to address our challenges will not be realized. And those reforms need to touch on a whole range of issues. Mr. Mo Ibrahim yesterday even spoke about something that we may think is insignificant, that the boards of directors of your multilateral institutions are not made up of independent directors. They are largely internal people or shareholders. So that in itself, for us, it's an important reform.
Present were leading figures of multilateral institutions and the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
Well, Africa failed to secure that debt relief many of the countries were looking for. So let's discuss these developments. Joining me now is Walter Mawere, an advocacy coordinator for Care International, joining us all the way from Somalia. Michael Terunga David is founder and executive director for the Global Initiative for Food Security and Ecosystem Preservation, GIFSEP, joining us in this conversation. Thank you all for spending some time with us. Mike, let me start off with you. Preservation was on the table, but African leaders were still looking for that leeway out, given the economic challenges we have. The fact that they don't have a way out now, it may shift priorities on pushing the green agenda. Don't you think so?
Yes, I think so, but this is a very important conversation that just began. So firstly, I would say that every human being has the right to a livable world. And to secure that livable world, all the rich nations and all the international financial organizations must transform the standard of doing business. The models which before now, don't favor African countries and African, countries being at the brunt of the climate change effect. So the conversation has started. There is now that need to continue to prioritize the support for vulnerable countries. So I watching and listening to the South African president talk about the need to have people, in the room. If Africans don't get a seat at the table, then we would continue to remain in the position to which we have been over the years. Because if you look at it, since the Paris Agreement in 2015, $100 billion promised, like every year, but how much of that, have been, remitted by those who caused this problem? But let me also put it in this perspective. The way it is like the global north countries and multinational companies are causing this problem for us. And they are going back behind to be giving African countries loans with big interest, to pay. So it's more like you are causing a problem for us and you are also benefiting from that problem. We shouldn't be getting big loans in this case, but we should be getting relief. We should be getting debt relief. We should be getting interest-free loans.
Right.
We should be getting, grants to solve some of these
problems.
Okay,
I'll get back to you on the aspect, yes, and I'll get back to you on the aspect of the grant and whether or not it's feasible for the continent. But Walter Moyer is also joining us from Somalia. Just hold on for us briefly, Mike. Walter, the issue about those who feel it best, for instance, in Somalia where you are, the effects are telling, so no need to have a discourse around climate change. But do you feel that, given what's happened and the fact that African leaders were not giving some leeway, at least to handle the debt crisis, so we can focus on the hunger crisis and issues happening in Somalia, that could compound Africa's climate agenda, isn't it? We'll get Walter shortly. But Mike, the point you're making about the grants, it's simply not as easy as that, looking at the fact that even these African countries we're talking about are equally facing some economic challenges.
Absolutely. So that's why we are advocating that at this point, you need to suspend, the payment of some of these loans, because these loans come with very big, huge interest, which means that monies that should have been used to solve some of the problems are being used to pay back loans that did not even make the impact in the countries. So we are also saying not just grant, and that's why we came up with the issue of loss and damage, which was discussed at the last COP heavily. But we are looking at, if you are coming up with policies, let policies, booster investment in emerging countries like Africa so that it does not incur more debt. But at the current way it is structured, this will continue if nothing is done about it.
Okay.
So I will say that, yes, I will say that two countries actually benefited. I mean, Zambia had $6 billion loan restructured, which is good. Senegal also benefited by getting an investment in renewable energy of $2.7 billion. So it's a good start to a conversation that will continue. The World Bank and the IMF meeting is holding in October in Marrakesh, in Morocco. And we believe that this conversation will go deeper into how to solve this problem.
Okay, let's hear from Walter as well. Walter, I was just pointing to the case of Somalia and how they're dealing with the hunger crisis. And these issues would have been less of a burden on African countries if we had some financial arrangements taking place in Paris, as we had Emmanuel Macron, the French president, hosting African leaders. But what's the way out for Africa now? And kindly unmute for me, Walter, as you make the point. Quite a terrible network connection to Walter there. But David, the issues around the loss and damage reparations, we need to go. But what would you say is the way forward as to how African countries, even at their own level, can find sustainable funding to sustain this green agenda?
So first, looking inwards, African countries need to put a price on carbon. We have huge deposits of, renewable energy, which we can tap ourselves. But more importantly for us, we need that easy access to finance. There is finance. I mean, the world is not broke and the world is not poor. An example was shown during COVID. And when COVID came, you saw how funds came out and, all the research and quick solutions came. And that is exactly what we expect in this, crisis that we have found ourselves. And probably it's because it is Africa that is feeling the brunt more. And that is why the global north seem to be relaxed about finding the solution to these problems. But the fact is that if you don't find a solution to these problems, you in the global north will also not sleep well, because migration is at your doorstep, it's at your borders every day.
Well, Mike, this conversation will continue later on, but I'm grateful that you're able to spend some time with us here on the Joy News channel. We take you now to Sierra Leone. President Julius Maada Bio is said to be taking a lead in the presidential elections after 60% of the votes has been counted. The president is fighting for a second term against 12 opponents. The election is said to be a race between the president, Bio, and he's standing on the ticket of the Sierra Leone People's Party, and the former cabinet minister, Samara Kamura, who leads the opposition All People's Congress Party, to be declared winner as a presidential candidate in Sierra Leone's elections. You must secure 55% of the total votes. Let's hear from Hawa Sali Samai, who's the executive secretary of Sierra Leone's Independent Commission for Peace and National Cohesion. Thank you for spending some time with us. And we must say that it's quite a trying time for Sierra Leone as we speak. The results are beginning to trickle in, and equally there are concerns about the transparency issues. Let's start off first off on the reports that we're getting about some pockets of attacks on the opposition political parties. How are you dealing with that?
As the Independent Commission, good afternoon again. As the Independent Commission for Peace and National Cohesion, our mandate is to ensure that there is peace and national cohesion. We've not been working alone. We've been working with other institutions and also the security sector to ensure that we have peace and national cohesion throughout this entire process. We have a situation room where we had calls coming up during the entire elections process. And with the calls and the partners we have in the situation room, we were able to do a lot of rapid response where there were security issues or where there were elections issue of late ballot boxes and things alike. But in terms of attack, yes, there had been some attack around the opposition's office, and this was because they prematurely announced results, which both parties technically did, but the opposition went out on the street and started dancing even before the formal announcement of the results, and hence tear gas was thrown at the streets and I think in their office, and this was immediately combated and stopped when the other security sector intervened.
And I believe that you do not want to go back to the dark days where, of course, your country was plagued with turmoil and chaos, and I'm sure that's why your organization and the role you play will be critical at this moment. The European Union, for instance, raising concerns about transparency and the coalition process. Have you admitted these challenges as the Peace Council, as we'll call it here in Ghana, and how are you addressing these issues as you go along?
There have been different reports. The AU and ECOWAS and the Council of Elders did their own report. And from their preliminary reports, they also mentioned that the election was peaceful, it was transparent. So it's reports versus counter reports, and everybody is looking at the reports from their own perspective and maybe their own culture and background. But so far, what we've seen, it's been very peaceful because those are the kind of angle we're looking at. And as I speak to you 30 minutes ago, the final results have been announced for the presidential because there were 4 elections going on simultaneously. And that's for the mayor, for local council, parliamentary, and the presidential. And the presidential results announced with the president leading with 56% as a whole. So now everybody's out celebrating in a very peaceful manner because I'm just coming out from the streets to evaluate the situation. And we've been calling as well up in our districts to ensure that it's peaceful. It's been very peaceful so far.
Right.
So we believe that Sierra Leoneans do not want to go back in those days where we're coming from. And for the opposition, we've been talking to them, ensuring that even if they're not satisfied with the result, that they should use alternative redress mechanism, which is the court, and they could file in a lawsuit, which the Commission of the Electoral reminded them that they have 7 days to do that after announcing the result, that if they were not happy with
I
it,
get
they
that.
have 7 days to
We're
file.
hard pressed for time. So just deal with these two issues for me in a minute. First of, what's the expectation from the president who's just winning his re-election bid? Have you spoken to him to at least bring on board the opposition parties so we can have calm? And also, the European Union, as you agree, is a critical stakeholder. You cannot do away with the potential sanctions that may come if indeed they're saying your election was not transparent. So how do you intend to deal with these multifaceted issues while you maintain peace in Sierra Leone?
Firstly, they said this was their first report and they'll be doing their full detailed report in 3 months. So we would wait for the full report in 3 months. We'll review it and we would definitely look at the recommendations, which will be critical, and see how, as per our mandate, we'll work with other institutions to ensure that we work on the most critical recommendations that will be. Our democracy have grown over the years, and we'll see far more improvements from last election to this elections. And this is the 5th elections we're having from since the Rebel War ended. And I'm sure we'll continue to grow with our democracy and the process itself. In terms of the president has just made his first speech, and in his first speech, he's asked that the opposition party come on board for development. So he's already stretching an olive branch. We will continue to speak to both political parties to see how they could work with us to promote peace and social cohesion, because definitely just looking at the voting pattern, you see that another part, that's the north and part of the country, voted for the opposition largely. So we want to bring the country together and see how we could work in harmony. Because there are a lot of intermarriages and a lot of kids along across culture and tribes, and we don't want that tribal divide because we've never had a real one in Sierra Leone.
I'm grateful. Hawa Sali Saima, who's the chairperson of the Peace Council in Sierra Leone, and it's just confirmed for you here on the Joy News channel that Julius Maada Bio has won his re-election bid as the president of Sierra Leone. We'll get you updates later on, but the ECOWAS Commission is concerned about the infiltration of light weapons and the increasing trade of these weapons within the SAP region. Let's bring in Dr. Sunny Adams, who is the programs officer for ECOWAS, responsible for disarmament and arms control. Doc, just last week you held a stakeholder consultation here in Accra. Concerns on the table is about the growing trade of these small arms. Why is it necessary for us to tackle this?
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is an important initiative. Like you know, in the ECOWAS region, we have the ECOWAS Convention on Small Arms and Light Weapons. The convention is a legally binding instrument. All the member states are parties to the instrument. And therefore, we needed to see that member states are operationalizing, all the provisions of the convention. One of the key objectives is to be able to reduce the numbers. And the only way you can reduce the numbers is to be able to have dedicated national structures, is to be able to have, appropriate political clout as well as resources to accompany, the national level implementation of the convention. Like you see, the preponderance of, illicit activities resulting from easy access to small arms is causing a lot of havoc across the region. So it's fundamentally important that we put forward, this instrument so that all our member states, will begin to see the importance of actual, practical, on-the-ground implementation of the ECOWAS Convention. I'm happy to say that all the member states are having national commissions dedicated to fighting this fight. And the immediate challenge actually is to see the full operationalization of these national structures. But for the Republic of Ghana, I'm happy to say they have a robust national commission on small arms that is fully operational and functional. And, they are thereby fighting, continuing the fight in terms of implementing the relevant provisions of the convention. The seriousness of this issue is what you just described. The vulnerability of some of our countries. We need to see some of these countries that are particularly coming out from civil wars. These countries do not relapse into what they have had in the past, and therefore a lot of it is associated to general elections. Countries that are having general elections, we often see tendencies towards opposition parties or communities fully arming themselves because of the uncertainties. So to answer your question directly, is an important endeavor. We need to see that the convention is fully operationalized, and the member states are really fully accompanying the process in terms of compliance. As you also know, probably the arms transfer regime in the convention is a critical component of why member states are consistently complying with the provision of the convention. All the arms that are imported, that are official arms that are being imported in the region, necessarily all the member states will have to, seek the authorization of ECOWAS, to enable them import. And that is the exemption process practice. Whenever, for instance, the Republic of Ghana would want to import, after the assessment of the details of what they will import, that assessment or request will be sent to ECOWAS Commission. The ECOWAS Commission president, through the instrumentality of the offices, in ECOWAS, will now assess that request,
right,
and provide the information to other member states for their opinion. So this transfer regime.
Okay, so this is a new. So this is a new law that you have. This is the new framework you're adopting.
It's not actually new. Since the entry into force of the convention in September 2009, member states have been, consistently complying with this provision. At any point, any of the services would want to officially import, would have to now subject the import, to the scrutiny of not only ECOWAS Commission but the other member states. They will have to, provide their opinions whether or not they are accepting, that particular request.
Okay. Dr. Sani, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but quite an insightful conversation with you. Grateful for your time. And that's all we have for you in this package of Connect Africa. Log on to myjoyonline.com. We have some more stories for you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Doc. And we'll see you.